There's a beautiful view of the waterfront area. It is a beautiful morning in Port of Spain, and we're coming to you live from the Hyatt Regency Hotel. And the reason we're enjoying the day outside, well, it is a big day in Trinidad and Tobago, October 1st. It is budget day. All eyes are on the Minister of Finance. What will Minister Hawaii say? You're going to actually see one of the TT Express passing by, you know, nothing as beautiful as a Trinidad morning. But joining us on set now, Dr. Bhoe, the Minister of Planning and Sustainable Development. We've just concluded a conversation with the former minister in the Ministry of Finance. He identified key areas that he is saying will determine whether or not this budget is a failure or a success. The energy sector, one of the major elements of it, transforming Trinidad and Tobago into a knowledge-based society. The removal of VAT, well, that announcement made by the Prime Minister over the weekend has received some criticism from the opposition and some independent analysts saying that it's simply playing politics with the expectations of the people. Is it enough to really ensure that food prices are down? Is it a long-term solution? Dr. Tewarie, good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Now, the first question I have to ask you would be about the front pages of the Guardian newspaper today. Rowley says media fell for VAT removal. Hook, line and sinker accuses PM of deception. Hawaii's test looking at the announcement to remove VAT, saying the former minister said that there were already, it's about 11 pages of items which are not on the VAT list.
So?
They're saying that they will have no impact really and truly, and it was just an announcement.
No, that's not true. The response by Rowley is a very political response. It's an attempt to make light of what was an impactful announcement. And we have to distinguish between the politics, the political strategy, and the implications of what the Prime Minister said about the removal of VAT on food items. First of all, I think she was sending a signal in the context of the ideological position that she articulated, which is that this government is different. The emphasis and focus is different. The focus is being with the people, and the focus is really on the ordinary citizen of the country. So that is one connection. The second thing is that she did not talk about the removal of VAT alone. She talked about the removal of VAT in the context of the containment of food prices and the containment of food inflation. And she also talked about it in terms of food security strategy, the production side of it. She talked also about the manufacturing sector and its links with the agricultural sector, and looking at that particular sector and looking at the whole business of importation of food. So it was a number of things that she raised, of which the removal of VAT was one.
Right. And
people like Mr. Rowley have calculatedly focused on the one issue of VAT without the fairness of looking at all of what she said. And this will have an immediate impact in the grocery store. Some of the importers of food have in fact been calling for it. And ordinary citizens, I think, want lower food prices. So I don't see how this can be something negative. It has to be something positive.
There's a story in one of the daily newspapers today that speaks about the functions of the BIR and several other departments, that they are actually incapable of handling their current workload. And now that you've increased the list, will they be able to handle it, or is it simply opening the system for further abuse?
Well, no, the VAT administration is separate and distinct from BIR, so that's the first thing. And she did indicate that they were going to establish a committee, that's to say the Honorable Prime Minister, that would look at this. I know that the Honorable Minister of Finance was already looking at the whole thing of how do you deal with the business of VAT in the country, and how do you make a comprehensive overhaul of the program which would achieve two things: reduce the burden on the consumer, but widen the net of generation of income in the VAT administration. And I know that in BIR they have been looking for years. This is since the 2 years of Minister of Finance Winston Dukaran, and this continues, looking at ways and means of making the BIR much more efficient in its collections, mechanisms, and strategies. So those things will continue.
Are you confident that we will put the right people, the right technology, and really the training? Because even the article alludes to the Assecuda system, which is still not fully implemented. I think it's been, it started since 2009. Now, almost 3 years later, the port systems are still a little inefficient.
It started before that.
Right.
When I was Minister of Industry in the first administration, all right, we had already begun to initiate that Assecuda system, and administration after administration have failed to implement it. I think for the first time we're going to actually do it. I think Minister Barrett has, as Minister of Trade, has taken that as a priority. And he's going to be able to achieve it now. I think some work was done by Minister Cadiz before in this administration, and we're going to try to achieve it now. And the problem has always been the resistance by the Customs Department to executing this, with all kinds of stories about why it wouldn't work and so on. But we have made a commitment that we're going to do it.
Minister, we just ended a conversation with the former Minister of Finance. The energy sector remains one of his biggest concerns, saying that, one, the pricing system, new competition, the changing landscape on the international economy, and then he's going to tie that, he tied it back into our revenue and expenditure profile, saying it's a worrying sign.
Well, the world is as it is. I mean, you can't do anything about the things that are out of your control. What you can do is to do things about things under your control. We are price takers, so we've got to deal with. We simply respond to that, and we deal with that. And you make strategies, whether it's in oil or gas, to deal with those kinds of things. But what we need to note are the positive developments recently. One, we have had a very, very successful bid round, and we have had before that a successful oil find. So that what we are likely to see is increasing production, all right,
but
in the energy sector. It will not be seen immediately. That is correct. And we are wrestling with the issue of gas price, and he's right. There are many, many more sources of gas. And therefore, our strategy has to change. And what is happening is that we are focusing on using gas, and that was one of the things articulated in the diversification conference. I think you were present at that, in which we are using gas as a feedstock for building a more value-creating and value-added and knowledge-oriented manufacturing sector. I think within the next year or so, you are going, because I know negotiations are going on now, you're likely to see announcements related to that, in terms of diversification of that kind of gas-based manufacturing in Trinidad and Tobago. And that will be part of the diversification strategy. So the important thing is what you do, is not what is happening to the world.
What you do and not what's happening. Now, the former minister also leveled criticism against the government, saying that it's a lot of talk and less implementation, specifically dealing with the diversification agenda. Well,
the diversification agenda is a hard agenda. But if you look at the GDP figures for 2011-12, you will see that there's a close to 3% increase in the services sector. Now, this is significant because services sector accounts for 64% of the jobs in this country. So if you have a 3% increase, you are talking about the implications not just for diversification and growth of the services sector, but you're also talking about the implications for jobs. So those are positive signs. But the big decisive steps that you want to see in diversification, you're not going to see in a year or 2 years. It's going to take time, and it's going to be affected by, you might call it, investment after investment. I know that in the financial sector now, what is happening is that they are negotiating with the banks for the establishment of basically backroom offices here, which we are going to have, and you're going to have a number of jobs. And I think you need to understand how these things work, which is that once you begin that, you tend to have cluster formation. And from that kind of cluster in the financial sector, you are likely to have evolution and growth and diversification, and it will happen. So the clusters have been picked, things like finance, things like tourism, things like food, which is not unrelated to that VAT issue, which people are trying to make controversial and which it doesn't need to be. It is picking the clusters and trying to link your strategy to those kinds of things.
The clusters and strategy development. Minister, obviously you have your overall objective. And in any strategic plan, you will have small objectives. You will have timelines to reach.
That's right.
If we have to look at that plan that you've been, and I did attend a diversification conference specifically with the financial sector and financial services.
That's right.
How many of these clusters have actually attained the successes that they were expected to, and how many are off?
We have been independent for 50 years, and we've had self-government for 56 years. Diversification has been very modest, regardless of how you look at it over those 56-year period. You had diversification, for instance, with Point Lisas, but that was basically in the energy and industrial sector. So we moved from oil and gas to things like steel and things like that. What the diversification that is required now is linked to your throughput of graduates from the tertiary sector, and is linked to research, is linked to building competitive capacity, and is linked to innovation. So these things you have to strategically focus on. We've never really developed tourism. I think that is going to happen now in a significant way. The financial sector has already grown to 11% of the GDP, which outstrips manufacturing, so it is happening. In food sustainability, you're already seeing the production platform being built. You're seeing basically the investment, the combination of big farms and land distribution for small farms. And you're going to see the results of that production over the next 2 years. And the key thing would then be the whole marketing and distribution and absorptive capacity. We've got to continue with that. But I do want to say a word about the implementation. I know you want to leave and come back. I want to talk about that. Implementation
and looking at where we are as a country. Now, we have been accused, we as a people, of having an implementation deficit. Almost 80% of all plans formulated are not implemented. How are we going to change that culture? Stay with us.